Shun it. Do not cross it. Turn aside from it. Pass on. For they cannot rest unless they have done evil. If they do not trip anyone, they lose sleep. That is the wisdom for the day. So shun it, do not cross it. Remember, that is walking in the way of evil men. So if you're just tuning in, this is the first time you're watching this episode, what I do is I do a daily wisdom. Usually I'm reading from the book of Proverbs to try to attain knowledge, seek understanding of that knowledge, and hopefully through that knowledge, that understanding, I will attain wisdom. And so yesterday's wisdom was keep hold of instruction. Do not let go. Guard her, for she is your life. Do not enter the path of the wicked, and do not walk in the way of evil men. And that's where today picks off. Don't walk in the way of evil. Shun it. Do not cross it. Turn aside from it. That's Proverbs 4:15-16. And so it's interesting. I was talking with my daughter. So I take my kids to school. Every morning, I'm, kind of the stay-at-home dad first part of the day. My wife has to be at work early in the morning. So I get the kids up. I get them ready for school, breakfast, all that jazz. Get them to school by 7:15. And then usually, then I get my work in. And then after that, I pick them up from school. And so while we were waiting for the kids to get down, I hadn't done my wisdom for the day. And so I keep a small little travel Bible in the truck. And so I pulled it. I was like, hey, Naya, let's take a look at what the wisdom is for the day. And it was these two verses here. And I said, it's interesting how, we'll go through our life, we'll go through our day, and we'll encounter people whose day isn't going so well. How you'll encounter people who their day is not, it's almost like their day is not complete unless they're mean to you, or unless they mistreat someone, right? And ultimately, it's a reflection of what they're used to, how they were raised. I was actually talking to my wife about this as well earlier today. There's Gay Hendricks wrote about, in his book, The Big Leap, he wrote about the upper limit problem. And the upper limit problem is basically your capacity to your capacity to experience happiness, right? So once you reach this upper limit of what you're able, of your capacity to be happy, you'll do something to screw it up to where you come back down to what you're more familiar with, right? We know this as like self-sabotage, right? Our imposter syndrome starts to creep in. And so once we start to experience our limit of happiness, we do something to screw it up, right? And so maybe you're going through your day and you encounter somebody. This was kind of a lesson I was trying to, impart on her. You come across someone that's being mean, and it's almost like their day's not complete unless they do that. Maybe they've reached their limit of happiness. And so again, it's a reflection of what they're used to. So if we're used to being devalued as men, if we're used to not being appreciated, if we're used to whatever, we'll then do something to devalue ourselves. We'll either devalue ourselves back to something that we're more familiar with, or we'll, be mean to somebody else, right? To bring us back down to what we feel is normal. And we just kind of have this back and forth, right? This is ultimately our vicious cycle that we all go through. So it's a reflection of, what they're used to. It's a reflection of how they're raised. And so somewhere along the lines, they, according to the Proverbs, they were abused somewhere. Their power, their sovereignty was taken from them. And ultimately, they seek vengeance on the world and the people around them. They become bitter, resentful. Somewhere along the lines, they were their trust was betrayed. I've gone through this. I think everybody's gone through this to a certain extent. Because this evil that the Daily Wisdom talks about, right? For they cannot rest until they have done evil. Evil and hatred is taught, right? Because by our nature, we are good, right? God created you and me, and he doesn't create evil. He is not the author of evil. He is not the author of confusion. Everything he created, he said, and it was good. So if you're confused about your identity, if you're following the path of evil, the path of wickedness, it doesn't come from God. Okay. So what I encourage you, if you feel like this is you, like, man, you've got a chip on your shoulder and you don't know why. You don't know. This is just the way I am. Like, we hear these, with guys tell our wives these things. This is just the way I am. Well, maybe it is just the way you are. Why? Why is it? Why are you that way? Take a moment to reflect on where you lost your sovereignty. And here's the thing. This reflection, it's going to be painful. I call this bucketing work. And it's one of the first lessons of element 1 of being a strongman. So within our program, the Better Man Blueprint, we guide men through what we call the 5 elements of a strongman. And one of the first lessons they need to go through to become a better man is they've got to do this bucketing work. Bucketing out the water of your soul, bucketing out the water of your past to get clear on what's lurking below the surface of your soul, right? So Robert Bly talks about this in his book, Iron John, where basically below the surface of every man's soul, below the water, is this Iron John. Think of it as like this person kind of pulling all the strings, ultimately facing your shadow, the dark side of yourself, right? And unless you do this bucketing work, you'll just continue to stay in that vicious cycle. That vicious cycle of not resting until you or I, maybe we've done evil to someone. Not being able to sleep unless we've done harm, unless we've tripped someone up. And so that was the wisdom for the day. And I love how it ties into the reading for the day. So this reading was from just a couple days ago, the 20th, and it's from the book of Acts. And I just want to share my thoughts on it. So it says here, Peter and John were going up to the temple area for the 3:00 hour of prayer. And a man crippled from birth was carried and placed at the gate of the temple, called the Beautiful Gate, every day to beg for alms from the people who entered the temple. When he saw Peter and John about to go into the temple, he asked for alms. But Peter looked intently at him, as did John, and said, Look at us. He paid attention to them, expecting to receive something from them. Peter said, I have neither silver nor gold, but what I do have, I give you. In the name of Jesus Christ the Nazarene, rise and walk. Then Peter took him by the right hand and raised him up, and immediately his feet and ankles grew strong. He leaped up, stood, and walked around, and went into the temple with them, walking and jumping and praising God. When all of the people saw him walking and praising God, they recognized him as the one who used to sit begging at the beautiful gate of the temple, and they were filled with amazement and astonishment at what had happened to him. So something interesting is happening here. Peter is giving something back to the crippled man. Think about it. He's giving him back his power. He's giving him back his sovereignty. He's giving him back his ability through the power, vested in him through Jesus Christ. He's given him back the ability to live his life and to live his purpose, right? Because all of us, somewhere along the lines, we lose our power. We lose our innocence. Something happens to us. It could be physical or emotional or psychological, emotional trauma, abuse of some sort. But somewhere along the lines, we lose this. Robert Bly calls it your gold. At some point, you lose your gold. And pretty much your whole entire life, you are trying to get that gold back. You're trying to get that power back. Jordan Peterson once said, the wise person is the person who finds what they lost in childhood and regains it. The wise person is the person who finds what they lost in childhood and regains it. So somewhere along the lines, men have lost their power, have lost their gold. They begin to shun instruction. They begin to shun wisdom. They begin to walk the path of the wicked. They begin to live a life of restlessness, of resentment, bitterness, and ultimately they just this dark road to where they're just looking to trip anybody up, right? They're looking to take vengeance on the world around them, right? Because somewhere along the lines, we lost that, right? So as I started thinking about this, reading, I was like, shit, I'm the crippled man. I'm crippled in my mind, crippled in my thoughts, crippled in my emotions, in my psyche. I mean, how many times have I thought more about money? If I thought if I had more money, like the better my circumstances would be. Like the more money I have, right? We tend to say this whole, what I call it, the if then trap, or the when then trap, right? When I have this, then this, or if I have this, then this. Trapped in the thinking of the more money I have, the better my circumstances will be, and as a consequence, I'll ease my pain. If I had this, then it would heal my brokenness. How many times have I looked to the world to provide healing of my pain? my brokenness. We all have it. You have it. I have it. So how many times have we looked to the world to give me back, to give me back? How many times have I looked to the world to give me back my sovereignty that I lost when I was 6 years old? I know exactly when I lost it. You know exactly when you lost your sovereignty, when your trust was betrayed. And the answer is too many times. So I ask you, how about you? How many times have you looked at the world to improve your circumstance? Have you ever thought, man, if I just had more money, I would enter, this goal. If I just had a better job, I'd be able to change these circumstances. If I had the right woman in my life, I'd be happier. Right? We've all done this. This is what, in the Better Man Blueprint, this is what we call putting the finite things of the world at the center of your wheel. Right? There's specific exercises, writing prompts, that we take our guys through to figure out what's the center of your wheel. Right? We've got all these elements, these 5 elements of a strong man, all these aspects of our humanity. And the goal is to figure out what's at the center of that, because what's at the center of that is how you're going to look at the rest of your life, the rest of the world around you. I've talked about this several times, right? But these are all finite things. Your work, your health, like all these things, they're not eternal, right? But what happens when you lose these things? What happens when you lose your job? What happens when you lose your woman, your wife, your whoever that is for you? What happens if you never make that money that that goal that you had? What happens if you never get the woman of your dreams? Then what? Right? We've seen what happens with a lot of men. Well, pretty much the answer is we remain crippled. We remain void of sovereignty because the material world, the things of the material world are at the center of our wheel. So that was just a very interesting reflection that I had there on the crippled. The gospel's pretty good too. It's from Luke. And this is what we call the road to Emmaus. Right. So the very day, the first day of the week. So context, Jesus has already been crucified. He's already risen from the dead. And there's these 2 of his disciples they were going to a village 7 miles from Jerusalem called Emmaus. And they were conversing about all the things that had occurred, right? And it happened that while they were conversing and debating, Jesus himself drew near and walked with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. I noticed this happen several times. Jesus prevents people from recognizing him. Mary Magdalene didn't recognize him. When Jesus appeared to his apostles in the Sea of Tiberias, I believe it was, they didn't recognize him. It took St. John of the cross. It took him. He was the only one that recognized Jesus. But I noticed this. So their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he asked them, "What are you discussing as you walk along?" Right. So now he's talking to them. They stopped, looking downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, said to him in reply, "Are you the only visitor in Jerusalem who does not know of the things that have taken place these days?" And he replied to them, "What sort of things?" Jesus, playing stupid, playing ignorant. They said to him, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word before God and all the people. How our chief priests and rulers both handed him over to a sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that he would be the one to redeem Israel. And besides all of this, it is now the 3rd day since all this took place." Some women from our group, however, have astounded us. They were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body. They came back and reported that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who announced that he was alive. Then some of those with us went into the tomb, found things just as the women had described, but him they did not see. And he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are! How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then, beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interpreted to them what referred to him in all the scriptures. As they approached the village to which they were going, he gave the impression that he was going on further, but they urged him, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening and the day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them, and it happened that while he was with them at the table, he took bread, said the blessing, broke it, and gave it to them. With that, their eyes were opened and they recognized him, but he vanished from their sight. Then they said to each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us on the way and opened the scriptures to us?" So they set out at once and returned to Jerusalem, where they found gathered together the 11 and those with them who were saying, "The Lord has truly been raised and has appeared to Simon." Then the two recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So this is what's known as the road to Emmaus. So something that stood out to me here, he said, "How foolish are you? How slow of heart to believe all that the prophets spoke. Was it not necessary that the Christ should suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Right? So Jesus is walking with these two apostles. He's walking with these two dudes, and they don't even notice that it's him. And so I'm thinking, it's like, man, Christ walks with you. He walks with me every single day, bro. He's with us all the time. And yet we do not see or recognize all that he's doing for us. I mentioned this, I believe in yesterday's episode. 70% of Catholics do not believe in the true presence of Jesus in the Eucharist. Each weekend we come to Mass, we receive our cracker, our grape juice, our wine, and we leave early before we've been dismissed so that we can beat the traffic home in time for the big game. Or head up for golf, or go do jiu-jitsu, whatever that is. But these men recognized him in the breaking of the bread, the Eucharist. It took a moment. So when I read this, I ask myself the same thing, right? Because they asked themselves, once they realized that it was God, Jesus, God in the flesh as Jesus, they asked themselves, were not our hearts burning within us while he spoke to us and opened the scriptures to us? I mean, just imagine Jesus walking and talking with you, breaking open the scriptures, giving you understanding, because understanding comes from God. It's a gift that comes from God, and we must be humbled to receive it. We don't come to our own understanding. We don't come to understanding on our own, which is why, there's no such thing as, well, I'll just pray from my house, or I don't need to go and, I'll just read the Bible on my own and just come up with my own understanding. No one understands on his own or by his own power. Our gift of understanding and openness comes directly from God, and we must ask for it and humble ourselves to receive it. So he gave them understanding. Just imagine that. Substitute that with anything else. Imagine me trying to learn jiu-jitsu, and I don't even realize that Rickson Gracie's here at our school teaching jiu-jitsu, or Hoyler, any of the legendary jiu-jitsu masters. Imagine not recognizing them. And then afterwards, you're like, oh my gosh, how did I not realize that was so-and-so? Now multiply that times infinity for God. So when I read this, I ask myself, was not my heart burning when Jesus spoke to me today at Mass? Was not my heart burning as I walked to him at the altar as his bride, to receive him, to receive his body, blood, soul, and divinity? So Jesus, just like he did to these men, Jesus makes himself known to us in the breaking of the bread, in the breaking of his body. And I want to key on a word here. It says, then the two recounted what had taken place on the way and how he was made known to them in the breaking of the bread. So what does it mean to know someone? So we hear this like back in the old days when men said they came to know a woman. What did it mean to know a woman back then? It meant to lie with her, right? It meant to lie with her and to experience the sexual embrace, right? That's what it meant to know a woman. That's what Mary said when the angel came to her and he's like, hey, you're going to have a child. And she's like, how can this be? I've never known a man. To know someone, it's the most intimate way. The most intimate way to know someone is through the sexual embrace, right? To have full knowledge of that person. So, for instance, I know my wife. If you're married, you know your wife. You know your wife in a way no other man does, right? And we can only come to love someone whom we fully know. And this is what Jesus wants for us. He wants us to know him physically and intimately. And the only way to know someone is to become one with them. And that is the Eucharist. When you marry your wife, what does it say? What does it say in Scripture? A man leaves his family and he becomes one with his wife, right? They become one flesh. We are the bride of Christ. Christ wants us to know him physically and intimately. He marries us at the cross. He marries us there at the Mass, because we are spiritually taken in time back to Calvary. And the only way to know someone is to enter into that person. Example, the sexual embrace. Christ wants that with us, and that's where the Eucharist comes in. Because he knows that we are physical creatures. We are physical creatures, and we desire the physical. He knows that. He knows that we desire intimacy. Christ knows this. He knows us. He made us. He knew us before he formed us in the womb. God created us for intimacy. And Christ desires intimacy with us. And to consummate any marriage requires intimacy and the physical embrace. And we are the bride of Christ. This is what happens every day, every Sunday at Mass. I say every day because you can go to Mass every day and receive Jesus truly present in the Eucharist every single day. At the Mass, it's where the bride meets her groom. Jesus is the bridegroom. We are the bride. The bride comes to know the groom in an intimate way, especially on the night of the wedding. Again, as I talked about in yesterday's episode, this is the importance of ritual. And through ritual, it's how we regain our sovereignty as men. That's it, man. Appreciate you watching. See you on the next one. Peace.